Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and this is the Black Ice Audio Aries, a $2,500 US DAC preamp, headphone amp, equalizer, and streamer all-in-one unit. This is Jim Fosgate's Swansong, at least according to Black Ice Audio. This was his final design before he died, and I've got to tell you, it is a true gift to audiophiles, headphone enthusiasts in particular, but audiophiles in general. And I'm really excited to be able to tell you why in this video, because I really fell in love with this thing and was impressed by this audio device in ways that few have impressed me. This, as far as I know, is a loan from Black Ice Audio. It will be going back, and that's going to be sad, and I may have to beg them to let me keep it, because I found it to sound excellent, be highly flexible and customizable, and offer, again, one of the best values in hi-fi going right now. So I'm going to tell you why I say all of those things. Now, it's not perfect. There are some ergonomic quirks in here that are, for me, are not deal breakers, but they are things that you should be aware of before you buy. But in general, again, this is one of the most impressive pieces that has come through in here in quite some time. So stick around after shameless self-promotion to find out why I say these things.
Hello. I'm one of the reasons that Wave Theory can't spend all of his money on audio gear. He wants you to know that your support is vital for keeping the channel running. So if you enjoy Wave Theory's bussin' review riz and no-cap review style and want to encourage him to stay in the basement so I don't have to listen to his dad jokes as much, like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also send him a donation on PayPal or sign up for the Patreon. Links are in the description. Now on to the review.
This video is going to be another long video because there's a lot of ground to cover here. Again, we have a DAC, a preamp, a headphone amp, a streamer, EQ options. It's an all-in-one, and I've got to explain like what's going on with all of this in there, okay? So some basic takeaways, and I've already said this a little bit in the intro. I'll flesh it out just a little bit further here, and then we'll unpack all of what I'm about to say in great detail. Use the timestamps that I will put on this to jump around because, again, we are going to be here a while. All right. This being an all-in-one unit is very interesting. All-in-ones tend to start from a disadvantage as compared to separate stacks of about the same price because they're sharing the multiple devices, however many you have in there, DAC, preamp, amp, streamer, whatever is in there, are all sharing the same power supply. So that's one limitation already. The other is that you've got all of those devices in one chassis in there, which can often lead to RF interference internally and increases the probability of ground loops and system noise and all of that kind of stuff in there. So these things are, so all-in-ones typically are starting from a disadvantage. And my philosophy on all-in-ones has been that if I can assemble a separate stack that gives me the same level of functionality and sounds just as good or better than your all-in-one, then your all-in-one is too expensive. You need to lower the price. To me, especially when we're talking about a piece here that is north of $1,000 and in this case north of $2,000, the need for convenience, while it doesn't disappear, becomes less of a concern with all-in-one units. And so it comes down to what's the level of functionality and what's the level of performance that I get for the price. And I'm happy to say that with the Aries here, I cannot name a separate stack that is going to match it for the combination of features and performance that it offers. So it's winning on that front right away, and to a degree that it frankly has reset my expectations on what a high-end all-in-one can be. Okay, so more on that coming up here. All right. The sound is highly customizable. That's another thing. It always sounds good. There's a lot of excellent technical performance to the sound here. But with the onboard equalization options, which I'll discuss in a little bit more detail soon, with the ability to tube roll because it's a vacuum tube-based device, okay, there's more customization going on in there too in terms of tonality and how forward the details are and that sort of thing. So it's highly customizable in its sound, but the sonic floor on it is very high. So that's another aspect of this. Then one of the truly remarkable features of this thing is the headphone amplifier, because it is rated at a maximum of 8 watts per channel, which I think is measured into a 32 ohm load. The website did not specify. But it's got a lot of power behind it and a lot of control behind it. And I found that it can comfortably power a huge range of headphones, from low impedance, high efficiency dynamics, those sound great, all the way up through Susvara. This is an excellent piece to drive Susvara, at least the original. I know they just announced a new one. Okay, but I'm talking about the original here, as I haven't heard the new one yet. All right, and then it also can even push the Modhouse Tungsten reasonably well. Not perfectly, we'll get into that later in the video too, but it does well there. And then it also is a good match to some headphones that are just inordinately picky about signal chains. Original Focal Utopia sounds really good on here. And even something like a Fostex TH900 series, while not the best match that I've ever heard, is far from poor on here. So just the flexibility that you get on this unit just from the headphone amplifier is also great. The value here is outstanding. The sound is outstanding and highly customizable. There are a small handful of ergonomic things which might be deal breakers for some. They are not for me. They could be for you, and I'll just name them quickly and then explain them in more detail throughout the video. 1. It lacks a remote control and a motorized potentiometer. Given the feature set of this device, that could be an issue for some. Okay, more explanation forthcoming. The input-output configuration is reasonably flexible. It is not horribly out of date, but it could use some updating. Again, given the target audience on all of this, I think having a couple of other input options would have been helpful here. 3. Tube rolling, you can do it, but one of the tube sockets is in a place inside the unit that limits the size of the tube that you can put in there. So I will talk more about that here as well. And then 4, the Wi-Fi implementation on this thing is just kind of okay. Now, Black Ice is very upfront about this, that the Wi-Fi is not really intended to be used as an audiophile level streamer. If you have some tech savvy, you can use it that way, but I think it's more at home using the AirPlay protocol to just be more of a convenience for people who want to listen casually and with background music and control it from their iPhone or something like that. Okay. Those are the chief complaints though. And again, they are not sonic, they are just ergonomic. And again, they're not going to be deal breakers for many, but they are things that you should be aware of before you buy. All right, with that, we're going to start unpacking all of what I just said there and going into detail on why I say these things. So let's start. And let's start with just the specifications on this. I already mentioned that the headphone amp is capable of delivering up to 8 watts per channel. The DAC in it, the onboard DAC here, is built around an ESS ES9038 Pro DAC chip. It can accommodate PCM signals up to 32-bit 384 kilohertz sampling rates. It also can play DSD up to DSD 256. There is a separate DSD controller, which is from, I just have it written down, it's SA. I will link to the website where you can see the name on that, but it has an asynchronous clock in it and all of that. The onboard Wi-Fi streamer is compatible with AirPlay and DLNA. There are onboard tone controls for high frequency independently on each channel. There is a sub-bass boost. There is a crossfeed / surround sound circuit on here that can expand sound stage that you can turn on and off. There's also up to 18 decibels of sub-bass boost with a EQ knob on this. There are dual 1/4-inch headphone, single-ended headphone outputs that are safe to use at the same time. Okay, and then finally, last note on pricing here. This unit they sent to me has the black carbon on here. That's the $2,500 base price, gives you that finish. If you spend an extra $400, there are a couple of options for wood veneer on the cover on there, so see the website for more details on that. And then while you're at it, you can also choose to add a $250 new old stock GE 6SN7 GTB vacuum tube, or 2 of them if you want on there, because again, this is a vacuum tube device that has a 6SN7 vacuum tube on the DAC board, and it's got a 6SN7 tube on the head amp preamp board in there too. All right, and so that's the basics of the features. I have a clip here where I show you the build of this unit, give you a unit tour, and I go into a deeper dive on each of those features. So let's go ahead and cut to that. All right, we're going to combine the unit tour with the features discussion, and I will even discuss some of the sonic impacts of some of these features, specifically the EQ features and all of that, since we are here and they're right in front of me, and that will help me remember to talk about them. All right, we see a lot of switches and a lot of knobs on the front panel here. When Jim Fosgate designed this thing, he was an old man, and his hearing was doing, you know, old person things, starting to fade on him. So a lot of this, a lot of the EQ options and all of that, and specifically, I think, maybe not specifically, but also like the ability to do independent EQ on each channel was a reflection of the fact that he knew that his hearing was going. All right, so we're going to dig into all of this here and all that. So one thing to realize right off the bat is that the front panel is very reflective. In fact, you see my reflection in there. Hi, okay? I'm waving. The other thing that you see is that it's glass on a black background. So even if you get one of the wood paneled sides on here, which I'll show you more of the chassis here in a minute, but even if you get one of the wood paneled ones, this faceplate is standard on all of those. So not only is it reflective, but you can also see in, like, you know, because I have bright studio lights on and all of that, that it gets smudgy. And even if you get your microfiber cloth out, like, you've got to wipe it down quite a bit to get those smudges out of there. And then, of course, you got to do it without bumping all of these adjustment knobs and all of that. So that's one thing to be aware of. Okay. 2 headphone outputs, both 1/4-inch single-ended. It's a single-ended device through and through. These are identical outputs. They don't sound different like they do on like the K&N HA1A Mark II. They are made to sound the same. Apparently, Jim Fosgate wanted to be able to share music and movies and TV shows and all of that with his wife via headphones in their later years. And so you have identical outputs here. It's perfectly safe to use both at the same time. In fact, Jamie DeMarco, one of the current partners at Black Ice, told me that many of their clients use this device for like local multiplayer gaming or to watch shows and movies with a friend or significant other or something like that. And so, like, it's perfectly fine to use both of these headphone outputs at the same time. I will say on that, though, the brief testing that I did on those two, you get the same volume output from either or. So you probably either want to use identical headphones on those outputs, or at least make sure that you're matching the sensitivity of the headphones and all of that to the people who are listening, because different sensitivities, different impedances and all of that, if you plug in here, will play at different volumes, and you just get one master volume control. I'm not aware of a way you can independently control volume here, so that's something to keep in mind. All right, between the 2 headphone outputs, we have the power switch, which has 3 positions. The middle position is off. If you flip it up towards where it says LED, you see that what was just white lettering of Aries is now glowing a bright orange. If you don't like that, you can flip this all the way down and that powers on the device. It's fully ready to go, but it does turn off that LED in front there. For the most part, I kept it on because I thought it looked cool, okay, with that glowing Aries there. But if you find that distracting, you are free to turn it off. Okay, right above that, we have the input selector button here. We have several different inputs. I'll show them to you on the back, but you have to cycle through them. So that's one of like the ergonomic quirks of this thing, is that there's not direct input access, you cycle. Also, every time you power off the device and power it back on, it's going to default to single-ended input 1, this guy right here. So if you use USB a lot, for example, every time you turn this off and then turn it on again, you're going to have to navigate this over to USB to get sound. Okay, or at least sound from the USB, I should say. All right, this row above that, we're starting to get into some of the EQ stuff. In the middle, we have a 3-position gain switch. We have a negative gain, we have a like middle or like unity gain, I think, in the middle, then we have a high gain there up at the top. On either side, what we have are slope switches. So here we have the high frequency equalization knobs, okay? For left and for right. So you can adjust the high frequency response per channel on this one using these knobs here. But then you also get to control like how aggressive is the slope or the roll off or like all that sort of thing on the equalization here. And so these 2 slope switches, again, 1 per channel, they are 3-position. Do you want a very shallow slope, in the middle, very aggressive, okay? That sort of thing. So you could have a fair amount of flexibility with that kind of stuff here. Okay, moving on up here. We have this switch right here, which can either engage or disengage the surround feature. This is, they have a name for it, I forget exactly what they call it, SSX surround, something like that. It's not actual surround sound. What it is like a crossfeeder and time delay and all of that kind of stuff that kind of simulates a surround effect. So, and that can like open up the sound stage a bit. And like, I didn't particularly like it for music. I tend not to like those kinds of things. For music, I'm more of a purist with music. But this does open things up and like make the sound staging and all of that bigger and more lifelike for like movies. And if you're a gamer, you're probably going to like that feature a lot too, or you're just going to expand out the sound stage. It becomes a little less in your head and that sort of thing. The nice thing about this switch right here is when you get this set, you can forget that where it is, and then you can just turn that on and off, okay? If the switch is up, the surround is engaged. If you switch it down to BYP, which I believe means bypass, then you cut it out of the circuit entirely. All right. Sub bass. Okay, this is not done per channel. This is for both channels, but you get up to 18 decibels of sub bass boost, okay, on this thing in 5 additional steps. I interpret step 1 here to be none. Okay, and then as you count up, is that right? Or are we below 1? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, that's it. Okay. Okay, so you've got 6 different positions of sub bass there, where 1 is no additional sub bass added, and then you get different increments all the way up to a maximum of an 18 decibel bass boost in the sub bass. On Black Ice's website, I did not clearly see it labeled what frequency that takes over or what frequency that applies to, but it is definitely in the deep bass. I used this on a couple of headphones that were a bit bass light. The Headphone version 2 was one of them. Let's see, my Utopia a little bit and all that, and also just tried it with Susvara just to see it, you know, torture the amp in here a little bit. And it's pretty effective. Like, this is a very tasteful and well implemented bass boost. I don't think I ever felt the need to go above level 3, but to each their own on that. Have fun. Okay, Then up at the top, we have the standard, you know, we've got a volume knob attached to a potentiometer. This does turn pretty easily. I would have preferred just a little bit more resistance in there, but not a big deal. I did not notice any channel imbalances at the low part of it either. Then we have a left-right balance control right there, okay? All right, now, let me add that generally speaking, I am not a huge fan of equalization. I pretty much disdain software EQ. I find that to be a really big pain in the butt to work with. But this hardware EQ here, all in the analog domain, is just very well done on this unit. I did not have to, like, just adjusting these high-level EQs down a little bit, if there were sibilants in a headphone, usually took it right out, okay? Did a great job. Conversely, there were a couple of tube combinations that were just a little bit too rolled off in the treble for me. Boosting these up to about 130 brought it right back, okay? Now, or at least brought in a level of treble presence that I appreciated and that sort of thing. Now, I will say that, again, these knobs do turn a little bit on the easy side. I guess I would have preferred a little bit more resistance in the turning. Not a big deal, but it's really easy to bump these, and there were several times that I would hear a channel imbalance in my headphones, and it would drive me nuts, and I would look up here and say, no, that's centered. And then, like, upon investigating, I would see that something got bumped somehow, and, like, you know, one of them was like that, and the other one was still at 12 o'clock. And so these can be a little on the sensitive side, particularly if you're on the steep slope, okay? So that's just something to keep in mind to check that out too. But that's the front panel of the unit, as well as a lot of its features. Let me turn it around and show you the back panel. All right, back panel. We have power input. Then we have 4 digital inputs via some sort of cabling. We have a USB-C input, and this will accept PCM files up to 32-bit, 384 kilohertz, and also up to DSD 256. We have 3 SPDIF inputs, 1 RCA coax, and 2 Toslink fiber optic here. There is a 5th digital input, if you will, and that is with this, the Wi-Fi antenna for the Wi-Fi streamer in there that will accept AirPlay and also DLNA, handled through either the Windows or Android operating systems. Now, the DLNA streaming protocol, to use it on this device, does require a bit of tech savviness. It works well, but you kind of need to know what you're doing, and you need to download like the Bubble UPnP app if you're going to do it through Android and all kinds of stuff like that. Okay, right next to the antenna, you see there's this little hole labeled reset right there. There's a small button in there where you could put stick a small screwdriver or like a unbent paper clip in there. Hold that button down for 5 seconds to reset the Wi-Fi configuration on this. Could be handy because, like, if you use AirPlay on this and then you try to go back to DLNA, it won't do it. Once you go AirPlay, you got to stay AirPlay. So that reset there is handy, but it also means that you've got to go through all of the reconnection process and all of that all over again. Now, Black Ice is very upfront, at least I found them to be, that this streaming implementation, for the most part, is not really meant to be a full audiophile grade streamer. Not necessarily from a sound quality standpoint, because through DLNA and all of that, it sounds fine, but it is a bit quirky and a pain if you're going to use it for DLNA. Again, it requires some tech savvy to do that. And then AirPlay is just there for convenience. So it's really just kind of tacked on, if you will, mostly for AirPlay use is what it sounds like. That's the primary intent for convenience that way. But then DLNA was added, so it can be used as an audiophile grade streamer if you know what you're doing. Okay, working our way up here. We have a bunch of stereo, unbalanced RCA connections. You see line out and DAC out. This one right here is the preamp output. Okay, and so that one allows you to output both all of the EQ stuff from the front panel, the high frequency stuff, the bass boost, etc. Okay, and also control volume right here. So this is DAC output and preamp right here. DAC out bypasses all of the equalization stuff. It bypasses the headphone amp and preamp circuitry altogether, and it's just straight line output from coming right off of the DAC board. And then there are 3 just stereo RCA analog inputs, okay, that just go right to the preamp and headphone amp board. I believe they bypass the DAC altogether in there. Why are there 3? I don't know. I don't understand why exactly there are 3. I can understand 1 for sure, because it's connect vinyl, right? Your turntable preamp right into one of these. So that just kind of leads me into an overall comment about the input-output configuration as a whole here. I mentioned that this device sounds wonderful, and it really does. And it has a huge degree of flexibility sonically and all of that. I think the input-output configuration is now here in mid-2024 just a little bit dated. Okay, I would, future iterations of this product here, I would probably exchange a couple of the RCA ins and one of the Toast-Link ins for an I2S and a LAN connection. Okay, also like upgrade the streamer inside there, make it rune ready, and all of that. I think having I2S and a LAN connection, Wi-Fi is fine, but also have the LAN would be really helpful, really important. I think you can also, I don't know that we need these 2 outputs separately. They could be the same connectors, just have a switch somewhere where you can just switch it between DAC out and line out. Some may disagree and think that it's necessary to have those separately, but I think to save room and get other inputs in there, that would be another thing that could be looked at. Also, just given how well the surround EQ stuff works for movies and gaming and that sort of thing, if there is a way to squeeze an HDMI ARC, audio return channel input on there, that I would really appreciate too. So even if you take 2 of these out here, you're gaining a fair amount of room. Condense these 2 down to a single output and trade in one of the Toast-Links there for, again, I2S, LAN, and HDMI ARC, and then have a rune-ready streamer in here. Boy, that would really make this device something at that point. The other thing that I'm going to mention, I didn't mention this when I showed you the front panel. Okay, there's the side, by the way, of the black carbon thing here. There's no remote control. Okay, so you do need to keep this within arm's reach if you want to be able to adjust volumes, if you're going to be changing inputs, that sort of thing. It is really made to be within arm's reach at all times. So that would be one more suggestion for a future iteration of this, is have a remote control with a motorized potentiometer on it. Those additions, those changes, I think would take what is already a very flexible and amazing sounding device and just make it absolutely incredible and nearly a must-have, okay, for anyone who's trying to do, just a whole number of audiophile things. Okay. That is a lot of, that's the unit tour, the features, the build, and all of that. And I know this is getting long, but there's a lot to talk about here. The next thing that I want to show is the mechanics, the process behind tube rolling on this, because there is an important comment to be made beyond just how to do it, and it's about what kind of tubes fit in there. So let's take a look at that. All right, the process of tube rolling is actually really simple, but it's not necessarily super convenient. So I think at some point you're going to find tubes that you want to use, and you're just going to run with them and leave this closed up, because to roll the tubes, you actually have to open the device. So the first thing I would do is push your antenna down here so it's out of the way. There are 2 screws in the top here of the case. We are going to take those out. I'm not going to make you watch me do that, but they're the only 2 screws you need to worry about. Take those out. Once those 2 screws are out, then this entire back panel here literally just very easily slides right back like this, and hello tubes. Okay, Let's see if we can get a little closer look in here. All right. What's immediately here on the inside of the side panel here, all that mess in there is the DAC board. So this vacuum tube right here goes on the DAC board. This stuff right here, I'll angle it just a little bit so you can see it a little better. This stuff right here is the head amp and preamp stuff all right here. So then this tube is on the head amp and preamp section of the Aries there in as well. Okay, so to switch the tubes here, literally you're just gonna pull these things out and put a new one in. It is that simple. There is one catch though. All right, these are the stock tubes, if you will, that Black Ice sent me to get started on this device. A Tung Sol 6SN7 GTB, which is a pretty common new production, basic new production 6SN7 tube these days. And then a NAS, new old stock, General Electric 6SN7S tube right here. Actually, it's a 6SN7 GTB as well, if I can read the print right on there, all of that. Now, how is this related to the catch that I just mentioned? Well, look at the form factor of these. They're a little bit on the smaller side. This form factor, and I also have my really old Sylvania 6SN7 VT231. That's like, I think, part of the 1944 release line and all that. These are amazing, but they are hard to come by these days. Okay, but anyway, just like look at the form factor of those. The catch that I was mentioning is that you have to have tubes of this kind of form factor to fit into the DAC or the tube socket that is on the DAC board. Okay, what will not work are tubes that have this kind of form factor. Apos Ray 6SN7 Select here. I have a review for those out. PS Vane Hi-Fi series 6SN7 right here. Or is it Pavane? Yeah, it's spelled PS Vane, but I keep hearing people say Pavane. Anyway, these you can buy right off of Amazon. I will put a link down in the description for those as well. Okay. The problem with this form factor like this, if you put it on the DAC board, is that just frankly, it's too tall. Okay, get that all the way in there and then try to close this up and boom, you can see we are contacting the tube right there. Okay, so that's not great. You do want to keep the cover on this thing, I'm pretty sure, because like it does act somewhat as a Faraday cage to protect vacuum tubes, which are sensitive to things like RF interference, okay, from said RF interference. So you want to be able to close that, which means you're going to need to go this form factor on the DAC board. So that's one limitation of tube rolling that you need to be aware of. I tried this form factor as well. This is the PS Vane 6SN7 SE. This is from their, no, it's not the Hi-Fi series. Is it the Classic series? I'll put a link. I got this off of Amazon too. Got a matched pair of these. Same deal. You put this in there and it is just too tall. The case, when you close it, clips on this part right here. So you do have to be careful what kind of tube you put in the DAC board there. Now, the head amp preamp board will accommodate this form factor just fine. So you can put those there, okay, no problem at all. And then one of this style on the DAC board, like so. And the other nice thing is that because these are two independent circuits, right? You've got a DAC circuit, then you have an amp preamp circuit. You can mix and match tubes. You are not required to put a matching set of tubes in there. You can if you want to, but you are not required to do that. You can mix and match to your heart's content, which gives you, again, back to the customization and customizability of this thing. Okay, it gives you a fair amount of options in terms of getting the tone and all of that that you want. All right. Since we're here, real quick thoughts on that tone and on that sound and all of that. So the stock configuration that Black Ice gave me, I will go ahead and return it to for sending this back. Okay, you want to remove these carefully so you don't bump that one. Okay, but the stock config that they had me start off with was the tongue sole on the DAC board and the NAS GE on the amp and preamp board. Okay, that sounded pretty good. It was warm, it was smooth, it was very, like, they call it liquid, but I think it's kind of like wet sounding, where all of the sounds are kind of blended together a little bit, and it was also very punchy in the sub bass. Lots of slam and dynamic impact in the low end, okay? And I did flip-flop these and all of that. I found that I liked this GE tube right where it is on the amp and preamp board. It is a little bit too thick, too warm, too wet sounding for me on the DAC board. I preferred a more neutral, crisper, a little bit more detail forward kind of sound on the DAC board. So the tongue sole did that well. I hesitate to recommend this just because of how difficult they are to find anymore and getting more and more rare. But the Sylvania VT231 sounded exquisite on the DAC board of this thing. Just lots of detail and resolution came out and that sort of thing. And so why do I prefer a crisper, more detail forward tube on the DAC? Well, DAC is part of source gear. All of that, and like at any spot in your signal chain where you lose like resolution and details and that sort of thing, you don't get it back, right? Once it's gone, it's gone. So hang on to it as long as you possibly can is my thinking here. And so I just generally preferred the sound of the DAC with a little bit more neutral, okay, kind of detail forward sound. The GE sounded pretty good again as the amp preamp there. Now, these two also did a pretty bang-up job on the amp section, amp and preamp section as well. This one here, the Pavane, still has like a very holographic sound to it, but it does bring the overall presentation a little bit more towards neutral and, like, you know, brings the details and all of that into a little bit more clarity and a little bit more focus. It's not more resolving than the GE and all of that, but it just brings the detail presentation a little bit more forward and just gives it a little bit more crisp and a slightly drier sound. The Ray maintains a lot of the warmth and thickness of the GE, but not quite as much. It's kind of in between what the GE was doing and what this one, the Pavane, was doing in there. So I mean, I also thought that it worked well right there on the amp board as well. The best combination for me was probably the Sylvania tube here and then this one. These do work on the amp board in this odd light bulb kind of form factor. There may have been just a slight amount of contact on the side here when this thing was closed, but not a lot. Lots of holography, lots of detail, but still a nice, pleasantly tube sound, like all that euphonic goodness in there. And then like a pretty good balance between wet and dry, I thought. That was probably my overall favorite combination here. But those are just some thoughts on tube rolling here. You can tube roll to your heart's content on this thing, and it really is, it does change with the different tubes. So you get a fair amount of freedom over the, you know, how forward is the detail presentation, where does it land on the wet dry spectrum, okay, the tone of it, like again, like the GE is just very warm, thick, smooth, and punchy. These others kind of crisp up and brighten the sound a little bit, make it a little less wet. Some of them sacrifice some of the impact on it, you know, and some don't as much, and so forth. But you can really customize it and get a tone and a timbre and like a level of detail presentation you want with tube rolling, which again just goes back to how customizable this device is. All right, this is really getting long, but again, a lot of ground to cover. Let's move on to other things. All right, before we turn our attention to sound, let's talk use cases really quick. In talking with the guys at Black Ice Audio, they say that like it's very common for people to use the Aries here for gaming. There's a lot of gamers who like this one, and also for movie and TV watching. And given the feature set and like that surround expander thing in there, that makes sense. And then also to do so socially, like I asked them, like, why are there two headphone outputs on there? And it turns out that a fair number of their customers either listen to music together, or they watch shows and movies together, or they do local multiplayer gaming together. And so it has the two headphone outputs there. And then again, it sounds excellent for music in general to go along with it. So really, when you put that all together, this is in a lot of ways, like the Aries here can sort of function as like a 2-channel desktop AVR. You don't have the video switching capability on it, but it handles a lot of desktop audio duty. So if you live in a small apartment kind of situation or something like that, and you watch a lot of music, you watch movies and TV and do a lot of gaming in an apartment kind of setting and all of that, and you're looking to up the quality of that, this is a really good option because it's a compact unit, and of course it drives headphones, where speakers and a surround system and all that could drive your neighbors crazy. And then again, you get that second output, so you don't lose the social aspect of it. So I think those are important points that I told the guys from Black Ice I would mention in the video out there as just something for you to consider. But it is also those same things that I think make the lack of a remote control a little bit of a pain, because you have to keep this within arm's reach. You can't adjust the volume and all that. So like even if you have it integrated into your television setup, you can't put this on the rack and then sit back across the room with a long headphone cable and be able to adjust the volume. You'll have to get up and move over and adjust the volume there, and then go back and sit down, or string a signal cable, like an optical cable or something, across the room so that you keep this within arm's reach. That is a little bit of an unfortunate oversight in my opinion. Hopefully a future iteration of this will address that point. All right. Beyond that, let's now start transitioning to sound and how it drives headphones and all of those kinds of things. Test gear that I used on this real quick. I did use the Wi-Fi on there in AirPlay to check it out and see how it went, and I just sourced that from my iPad, which is a 10th gen iPad, and I used the iPad as a Roon endpoint via AirPlay. That had to convert everything to 44.1 kilohertz PCM output, so that was not bit perfect, and it was just there to see if it works. It does. Works fine, okay? I did not use the DLNA functionality on this unit, but I did use it on Black Ice's Glass FX DAC, and it's the same Wi-Fi implementation on this as is in the Glass FX, so if you want to hear more thoughts on how the DLNA works, go see that video, which I will link to down below. All right. Other than that, I plugged in one of my Sonor Ultra Rendu streamers into the USB-C input on this using an AudioQuest Forest USB-C cable, and that Ultra Rendu would have been a Roon endpoint that was playing either lossless or high-res FLAC files, either locally or streaming via Qobuz, or playing local DSD files, again also as a Roon endpoint. I also plugged the Toastlink optical digital output of my PC, my Windows 10 desktop PC's motherboard, into one of the Toastlink inputs on here, and I used that to test some show watching. I believe I'll watch a couple episodes of the latest season of Star Trek Discovery on there to try the sound on that, and I'll comment on that here in just a little bit. Okay. And then, let's see, what other sources did I use? I also connected another Sonor Ultra Rendu streamer through a Singer SU6 DDC, and then used a coaxial connection into the coax input of this as well to check that out. All right, and then, let's see, headphones used. I am primarily a headphone user, so I use the direct headphone outputs of the Aries to drive a huge range of things. So, Focal Radiance for a primarily dynamic driver, low impedance headphone, along with my Fostex TH900 Mark II with Lawton Purple Heart chambers on it. Again, another dynamic driver, lower impedance, somewhat easy to drive headphone. Okay. Bunch of planars. Hi-Fi-Man HE1000 SE. I tried the Modhouse Tungsten double-sided, Hi-Fi-Man Susvara, Hi-Fi-Man Aria Organic. I also had the Headphone V2 in for review lately. That's an AMT or ribbon driver. Tried that one on here as well. Focal Utopia Original, Mastrop plus Sennheiser HD6XX, and then Beyerdynamic DT880 600 ohm. Those last couple being high impedance dynamic driver loads to try on here. I will comment on all those pairings in a moment. I also did use both the DAC and the line out outputs on this thing to go into the single-ended input of a Mjolnir 3 headphone amp, and then also into the inputs of an LTA Velo headphone amplifier, which I just recently got in for review. So that review will be coming up in the not distant future as well. Okay, and then those two devices would drive any number of the headphones that I just mentioned on there, but I did that to check the quality of the preamp and DAC outputs, okay, on this device. More info on that shortly. Anything else that I need to mention for source gear? I don't think so. Okay. And I've kind of already alluded to this in other places in the video, particularly where I talked about tube rolling and all of that. It is very difficult to nail down a stock or like standard sound signature for this device, because with tube rolling, which is part of the experience of this device, and with all of the onboard equalization options and so forth, you can really change the tone and the timbre in a lot of ways. I will say that regardless of the tube complement, the tube complement that I tried on this thing, the sound tended to be just slightly warmer than true neutral. So there's usually just a little bit more sub bass and like up through the mid bass kind of energy, but it never came across as sounding bloated or congested to me, like at all. The sound is also tends just a little bit more towards the wet end of the spectrum when we talk about wet and dry. The tube rolling can move where exactly it falls on that spectrum a little bit, but it does seem that just this device's natural sound with the selection of components, electrical components, and it does have just a little bit of a wet character to the sound as a baseline. Okay. The treble is also generally very well controlled and slightly rolled off at the top end. And again, you can get a little bit more treble presence, a little bit more airiness with tube rolling. You can boost the high frequency controls on here if you want and bring back in some of that air. But with those high frequency controls at the 12 o'clock positions, generally speaking, it's a little bit laid back and rolled off in the top end and almost rarely sibilant. Even tracks that are sibilant in their recording, it does kind of blunt that a little bit. So it does roll off in the top end a little bit again, and is close to what I can call a stock configuration as there can be on a device such as this. The other thing that I noticed here is that the low end is also very robust and punchy. It is very dynamic and impactful in the low end. There's always a pretty healthy amount of sub-bass presence, even with the sub-bass dial, EQ dial, turned all the way down into the no added, okay, dBs in there. It's just a fair amount of sub-bass rumble, great bass extension, and it's also very authoritative and impactful. There's lots of slam, there's lots of impact, and that sort of thing. And yes, you do change some of that with tube rolling, particularly the Nas GE tube that Black Ice will sell you with this, brings out the impact and the slam and the bass rumble even more than a lot of the other tubes, but it is always kind of there. Okay, so just keep that in mind in there too. Okay, the holography, the spatial holography, also excellent. The soundstage never stood out to me. Again, this is without the surround effect engaged, okay? So just with that bypass, the soundstage never stood out to me as being overly big or overly small. It's just kind of what it needed to be, unremarkable in terms of its overall size. And just let the headphone, if you have a big staging headphone like the HE1000 SE, then you got a big soundstage. If you had a smaller staging headphone like the Sennheiser HD6XX, then you got a smaller soundstage in there. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. However, the spatial holography within, the imaging, the separation, the depth, the layering, all of that, all very strong. Again, as close as we could get to a stock configuration, which again, difficult to pin down, but it was never poor. You do change it a little bit. You change its nature. You change like how crisp the separation is. You change like, you know, a little bit of the depth dimension in particular, like how clear that stands out with tube rolling and all of that. But again, it's never poor. And again, you're going to dial it in and customize it to a level that you want with tube rolling. Okay, so the baseline of performance of this thing, the floor, even with just basic standard, like standard issue 6SN7 tubes, is really high. It's just an excellent performer. I'll dive into a couple of quick comparisons here to give you an idea, because remember how I mentioned I use both the DAC out and the line out into a couple of other headphone amps to check the quality of the onboard DAC in here. Particularly into the Velo, because it has multiple RCA inputs. I also plugged my Cord Hugo 2 in and sourced it using its matching 2Go streamer wirelessly to my network, and then also as a Rune endpoint. And then I was able to switch volume match as best I could, and then switch back and forth just using the Velo's switching on there to compare the DAC in this to the DAC in my Hugo 2. The Hugo 2, just the DAC portion is easily worth about basically a $2,000 DAC in my opinion. And this DAC in here sounded a little bit different, but to me technically was right there step for step with the overall technical quality of the Hugo 2's DAC. The Hugo 2 was a little bit more neutral in tuning, a little bit more incisive in its detail presentation, and it's staged a little bit bigger. Okay, it may have been just a hair smoother in treble tonality with the tubes that I was using during this test. And I think I just had the tongue sole tube on the DAC board when I did this one. Okay, so again, starting at the lower end, okay, there in terms of what you can get out of the Aries. All right, but the DAC output from the Aries, again, was just slightly warmer. It was fuller in the bass. It had an overall weightier tone to it. So it sounded like it was just more fleshed out. There was more meat on the bone of the sound. And some of that was because, again, it was a little bit wetter sound, okay? And some of that was just because there is the warmth and all that. But anyway, it just sounded fuller, meatier, weightier, and all of that. Never bloated, never congested, okay? Never too thick or too slow, unless you put the GE NOS tube on the DAC board. I didn't like that combo, but with the other ones, I did not pick up on any of those negative traits I just named, okay? But when it comes to the resolution, the holography, and all of that, like just the technical aspects of the sound, the DAC output on this was right there step for step with the Hugo 2's DAC output, okay? So that's pretty good. That's really good because I really like that Hugo 2 as a DAC. And this was right there step for step with it. Okay. So excellent there. Then, of course, you also get preamp functionality of this too. So you can add in the flavor of sound that you added because of the tube that's on the preamp / head amp board. And then, like, if you have EQ engaged, it's the head amp and preamp board where that happens in this unit here in the analog domain. Then you can get those EQ things from the line out here and adjust the volume. So you've got that option in there as well. All right, now let's talk about the headphone amplifier in here, because that's the thing that just really blew me away about this. On a technical level, when you talk about resolution capability, when you talk about dynamic impact, when you talk about the holography and the spatial presentation and all of that, those kinds of technicalities in there, the sound quality that comes out of the built-in headphone amp here, to me and to my ear, is right on the level of something like the Schiit Molnir 3 and the Vioelectric HPA V222. I have reviewed both of those here in calendar year 2024. I will link to those reviews in there. But just a quick reminder of those. Those are both $1,300 headphone amps, standalone headphone amps. And they're both very good. They are both state-of-the-art for $1,300 headphone amps right now. The Mjolnir 3 being a little bit more true neutral in its signature, but very dynamic and very punchy, very active, lively, impactful kind of sound. The V222 being a little bit warmer, thicker, fuller, like stereotypically tube-like in its sound, even though it's also a solid-state amplifier in there, but also bringing a lot of that low-end heft and impact to it as well. I thought the Mjolnir 3 was as good as you're going to find at its price for headphones under 60 ohms of impedance. And the V222 is as good as a headphone amp as you're going to find at its price for headphones over 60 ohms of impedance. The Aries is about as good if they just pulled the amplifier out, just the head amp out, and made it its own thing. Priced it at, you know, $1,200, $1,300, $1,400, $1,500, right in that range, which I think you could probably get for it with relative ease. It would probably be the best all-around headphone amp at that price because it doesn't seem to care whether it's driving a low impedance load, a middling impedance load, or a high impedance load. It sounds great with all of them. On my Discord, one of my patrons, see link in the description, asked me, are there any particular pairings, headphone pairings, all that, with the Aries that stood out as just being truly excellent? And the answer that I gave it, I admit, initially came across as a little bit flip. Okay? I just said headphones. That was my answer. It matches well with headphones. Okay? Because I really couldn't find a headphone across the wide range that I mentioned here that was truly a bad match to this thing. They all sounded very good to excellent on there. Just the flexibility of just the headphone amp alone in terms of what it is able to drive is genuinely impressive. Okay? Low impedance, easy driving, dynamic driver headphones. Sounded great. Okay? They were fine. All right, the Susvara, the original Susvara. I have not heard the new one. Okay, the original Susvara, notoriously hard to drive. This thing handles beautifully. For $2,500, I mean, okay, the Hi-Fi Golden Wave Prelude headphone amp, which I have reviewed. I'll put a link in the description. It's $2,500 US all on its own. It is just an amp and a preamp. No DAC, no EQ, nothing like that. It's just a headphone amp and a preamp, $2,500 US. That has been the best amp that I have heard anywhere near that price for the Susvara. Okay, by a fairly comfortable margin. The next one up would be the Ferrum Ore with the Hypsos power supply in it. That's also a pretty good match. I personally preferred the Prelude. I can definitely understand if someone would prefer the Ore, but that combo is another $600 more yet than the $2,500 Prelude. I bring those up to say that the amp in here drives the Susvara, at least in terms of the control and the dynamic impact and all of that, just as well as those other two. Those other two will probably get you a little bit more resolution and detail retrieval out of it, particularly if you match them to a higher end DAC than what's in here. But again, it's not an apples to apples comparison because those are $2,500 and $3,100 amps that are just amps, right? This is $2,500. It's got an amp and a DAC in it, and I gotta tell you, it is a great match to the Susvara. In fact, Jamie DeMarco of Black Eyes told me that a fair number of their clients use this to drive the Susvara, and happily so, and that makes sense. It is a good, solid amplifier for the Susvara, okay? Period. All right. Focal Utopia, at least the original, that's the one I have. Yeah, right there. Okay? Notoriously amp picky. This handles it just fine. This is one of the best matches to the Utopia that I have heard out there. It's great. And also, the Utopia can comfortably handle a couple of notches of the sub-bass boost that the Aries brings, well, before you get to a lot of clipping and all of that, even up to my 72 to 75 dB average listening level for critical listening. And what's interesting about that is like the sub bass presentation then on the Utopia starts to sound a lot like the stock sub bass presentation on the Radiance. Okay, which I find fun and enjoyable. So, I mean, put the Utopia on here, engage a little bit of sub-bass boost, and you have a Utopians, okay? I love how Focal's headphones, their names portmanteau together so well. Anyway, okay, so that was interesting out there. The TH900 Mark II, again, also notoriously amp picky. Not quite as good as a synergistic match on this one as the TH900 is on something like a Headamp GSX Mini or an Urzatich Perfitus amp, but it's not far behind, okay? I could see a good number of people being happy with that combo right there, especially if they haven't heard the other two combos. So that's one that was good but not great, okay, on there. Mod House Tungsten. Sounds good. Sounds very good. The resolution and the control and even the dynamic impact are all present when the Aries is driving the tungsten, particularly the double-sided tungsten. The issue that I think some people are going to have and where there's going to be disagreement out in the community as to whether the Aries is a good option for the tungstens is just in how loud it can get. I had to max out the potentiometer, and that's when I was also using this as an AIO, using it as a DAC, okay, in there as well. I could get it up to about a 70 dB average, I want to say, which is just a couple of dB below where I normally prefer my critical listening volume to be. Again, the control was there, the detail was there, the holography was there, the impact was there. So all of the qualities of sound that you look for sounded fine. It's got plenty of control. It just runs out of a little bit of gas when it comes to the loudness on the tungsten. For me, I know Ryan at Mod House felt the same way and all of that. But Jamie at Black Eye says he uses this to drive his double-sided tungsten a lot, and he thinks it's just fine, but he doesn't listen quite as loud as we do. So there's going to be disagreement within the community. I can understand both sides of that disagreement on this just fine. Okay, so that's out there for your consideration. Another one, like again, I said headphones work well because the HD6XX also sounded really good on here. As holographic, like again, the HD6XX has that reputation of like a 3-blob kind of imaging thing where you've got left, right, and centers kind of in blobs. The Aries did a good job of fleshing out left, center, and left, right on that headphone and making it more coherent in its staging, so that was really good. The Beyer DT880 600 ohm, though, that was also a phenomenal pairing. The DT880 is notoriously challenging in its treble. If you do not control its treble well, it will get very sharp, very sibilant, very ear-splitting. The Aries controls its treble very, very well. Also, give it a couple of notches, give the DT880 a couple of notches of bass boost on it, and I just found it to be now like a mildly V-shaped, very impactful, surprisingly holographic for a $200 headphone, surprisingly resolving for a $200 headphone, and just ridiculously good in treble timbre for a $200 headphone in there. So that was also a really strong pairing, and I just sat down and listened to a few tracks to see how it would go on that, and I think I ended up listening to the full Who's Next album by The Who, using the DT880, which I have found can get a little bit fatiguing on that headphone because the treble is usually not well controlled and it's just a little bit thin sounding because the bass on it can be a little bit lean, but not with that sub bass boost, and the treble was very smooth on here and I just really enjoyed that listen. Okay, but realize here, we're talking about a big range of headphones all working well. The Hi-Fi-Man HE1000 SE sounded exquisite on here. The Headphone V2 sounded exquisite on here. The Headphone V2 also really appreciated the sub-bass boost that the Aries offers and all of that. So, okay, all of that is there. So again, back to the flexibility and what this thing can do and so forth. It's really astounding and truly impressive. All right, So when I talk comparisons, I don't really have a whole lot to compare to. The only other all-in-one unit that I have around this price is my Hugo 2. And that's not really a fair comparison because that's a transportable unit, battery powered, that is designed for different use cases than this one. But I will say that on a raw technical level, they're very close to each other in terms of sound. The Aries has the advantage that it drives just about every headphone on the planet. That's not an E-stat anyway. The Hugo 2 has the advantage that you can take just about any IEM with you and many headphones with you in a transportable setting, okay, and just go somewhere else, all of that. The Hugo 2 also can be a DAC and preamp for a 2-channel system, and it comes with a remote, so that's another advantage that it has as well as like the Hugo 2 responds better to upsampling, like at least it goes up to 768 kilohertz sampling rates comfortably and by design, where this one will top out at 384 on there if that matters to you. But technically the sound is about the same, but like again, the amp in the Aries just leaves the amplifier in the Hugo 2 in the dust when it comes to being able to drive headphones and that sort of thing. So other than that, like just the other comparisons that I've talked about here, like I do think the DAC in here is roughly on the level of the DAC in the Hugo 2, which is excellent, okay? The amplifier in here has all of the technical abilities of something like Schitzmolnier 3 and Violectric's HPA V222, but it comfortably drives a wider range of headphones than either of those two amps do, okay? And see my reviews on those two for that to be more fully fleshed out. So then circling back to like my comments, like the value of this. I mean, I think we've beat customizability to death with the equalization and the tube rolling and then the general flexibility of being able to drive just about whatever you want to drive. Okay, and so forth. But let's return to the value. I can't name a separate stack that does everything this can do and sounds as good as this for $2,500. I've been thinking, could I do it for $3,500? And even then I have my doubts. Maybe even up to $4,000. Could I do that? I have my doubts. Okay? Maybe at that point, but you might need some sales to be able to get that price down a little bit. Okay? So by the time you add in that this thing is a very good headphone amplifier, it's a very good DAC, it's a very good preamp, and then at least it has a streamer in it. Not a great streamer, at least not a super easy to use streamer if you want to use it as an audiophile grade component and it's not Roon capable, okay? Even then, you've got 4 things in there that are all well done. Oh, and then you've got equalization options, right? So call it like 5 things it can do. EQ, streaming, head amp, preamp, DAC, okay? 5 things, all of them well implemented, all of them sounding pretty good. Okay, the value is just outstanding. And again, that's before you talk about like it'll drive radiance, clears, you know, easier driving dynamic driver headphones all the way up through Susvara and even tungsten pretty well. That's pretty incredible, right? Yeah, I'm running out of superlatives there. So that's where I talk about the value in there, that it's one of the best values in hi-fi. In addition to sounding great, it's just one of the best values in hi-fi. And I mentioned at the top of the video, like it's Jim Fosgate's Swansong. It's his last design. To me, it seems obvious that what Jim was just an expert and master of designing audio gear. And he poured all of his knowledge and skill into this device, and it paid off because the performance and the features that you get for this price are just truly astounding. So, you know, everyone say thanks to Jim Fosgate out there when you get a moment, because it really is like, it's a swan song and it's a gift to we audiophiles at the same time. So I highly recommend the Aries. Yes, it has that small number of ergonomic quirks. Like I would like to see a remote control. I would like to see an update on some of the input-output options. Okay. The position of the tube socket on the DAC board is a little bit odd when you've got it limits the number of tubes you can roll in there and that sort of thing. But to me, none of those are deal breakers, and it doesn't change the fact that this is just one of the best values in hi-fi. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop there. I think I've waxed about it enough. Thanks to Jamie DeMarco in particular, since he's been my contact over at Black Ice and has answered a lot of my questions. Thanks for sending this over. Please let me keep it. I want to hear, like, with the new Susvara out there and all that, I want to be able to hear how well this drives that and all that. And with also, with that being the reality, something I'll add in real quick, just to talk about the value thing real quick before I go, is like the original Susvara on the used market, prices are probably going to come down soon. Snag one of those and get the Aries, and boy, you're going to be glad you did. Okay? You're going to be glad you did. So I'll throw that thought out there. Then also, like, used Utopias, the originals, you can get those under $2,000 anymore. Grab one of these. Just the value, incredible. HE1000 SE at $1,700 on one of these. Value, incredible. Just absolutely incredible. All right, that's enough. Thanks again to Black Ice. I really enjoyed this. Please let me keep it. To the rest of you, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, comment, check out my PayPal, my Patreon. Generally do those things you do to support YouTube channels. And, if you're able, go buy one of these. Put in more orders for this than those guys can handle, because it's really a truly remarkable product flying under the radar. Okay? All right. Thanks again for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.